Hi, I'm Charles Galda, your host for Vision New England's Church in Action program. This week, I'm talking with Pastor Bobby Warrenburg. Bobby pastors North Shore Community Baptist Church in Beverly, Massachusetts on the North Shore. He's also the founder of the North Shore Gospel Partnership, which is some of what we'll be talking about today. Bobby, thanks for being with us again.
Great to be here with you, Charles.
Thanks. Well, that's for folks who may not remember or maybe missed a prior episode that you've done. Can you maybe fill folks in a little bit about your bio, where you're from, how'd you get to the North Shore, and maybe tell us about North Shore Baptist too.
Great. Yeah, so I grew up in Austin, Texas, in the American South. Became a Christian through the church I kind of grew up in, but also through Young Life, the parachurch ministry. University of Texas, was in the professional world for 3 years or so, doing accounting and consulting. Then my family and we moved to China, where we worked. I did financial consulting in China, but also worked with house church pastors, and we did church planting in China for a few years. So we were in Tianjin, which is just south of Beijing, and also the now famous Wuhan, which no one knew of Wuhan back in the day, but now everybody knows of Wuhan.
Yeah.
After that, we moved here north of Boston to Gordon Conwell to do theological seminary training. So I was here for a few years and just absolutely fell in love with this area. The culture, the people, the church, and also just I really wanted to study in a part of the United States that was just a little more post-Christian than the part I kind of grew up in. I've always had, really since I think that Christ really called me to himself, I've always had this kind of impulse to those who have questions about faith, questions about Jesus, a little bit skeptical, not sure where they stand on things. I've always been drawn to contexts and people like that. And so Gordon Conwell up here in New England was just a great place to study in the midst of. After that, I had some opportunities maybe to move back to Texas and be a pastor there. But with that kind of impulse of like a post-Christian context, a friend of mine whose father was British, there was an opening in their church in London, England. And so I ended up being a pastor there for 8 years, and absolutely incredible time in my life. Made some lifelong friends. It was a fruitful ministry with an amazing ministry team, and just an incredible opportunity in a pretty missional context to think about how do you make disciples, how do you preach the gospel, but also just growing as a pastor, learning how to, be an elder in the church and do visitation, weddings, funerals, and that type of thing. So just over 8 years there in London.
At an influential church there. You're too humble to say it, but it's an influential church there.
Well, yeah, I think it's become more influential since I left, probably. But just a really healthy church, one of the churches in the independent network of churches there in the UK. And, the evangelicalism in the UK is a bit of a small world. And so I know we're going to talk today about collaboration and partnerships, and a lot of that was quite intuitive over there in the UK. So it was a great context just to start in as a pastor. We have family, obviously, back here in the U.S. I'm an only child. My parents here actually had some Bangladeshi Muslim friends that were challenging me to think about how I look after my parents and the responsibility I have as being a son. And that, in combination with my wife wanting to be closer to nieces and nephews, we felt a sense that we needed to move back. And I was a little bit devastated because I just so much loved the church and the ministry there. But what I quite literally did was J.D. Payne had produced a survey of the least reached counties in the United States. And again, this impulse I was saying of where is there less access to Christ in a church and the gospel. So I did a search on the internet of what are the least reached places in the U.S. And I came across this study, and I'm reading down the list by county, and lo and behold, Essex County, which is where Gordon Conwell is. And at first I was a little surprised. It was like less than 3% people with kind of a vibrant, meaningful faith in Jesus. And I was thinking Gordon College, Gordon Conwell. I knew of some really great churches in Essex County. But then I thought about how difficult it is for our churches at times to reach people who grew up here and not just transplants into the area. And I thought to myself, I would love to do ministry there. I'd already fallen in love with, but what are the odds that that would ever work out? And so long story short, Derek Baker, who's a lifelong friend, also a pastor at a Presbyterian church here, put me in touch with Jeff Arthurs, who's my old preaching professor. And he was at North Shore Community Baptist and connected me with the search committee. So I've been here now for 11 years.
And you have more than one or two Gordon College and Gordon Conwell professors there.
Yeah, we have. And definitely, yes. And over the years as well. And I can remember a particular sermon from the book of Exodus. And I think I'd even been as bold to make some comments about the Hebrew. And I look out and there's my Hebrew professor visiting that Sunday and thinking, oh boy, what is he going to say? And he was actually unbelievably gracious. But that's always a little interesting, and having kind of professors in your congregation. But to be honest, they need Jesus just as much as everyone else. They need to be re-envisioned by the gospel, and they need the body of Christ, and to be able to use their gifts and story to kind of connect with the church and think about their own place of mission, really. So, over the years that you become a little bit less intimidated by that. Yeah.
Well, and I wonder if they're not maybe a little more gracious, even though they may feel like they know a lot more than some of us who don't really know anything, but think we know everything.
Yeah, no, that's true. No, and I have to say, hands down, that it's always been so positive. In fact, on that particular Sunday, this Hebrew professor, his name's Gary Pratico, and just so graciously, he said, you brought out, aspects of the angel of the Lord. It was the angel of the Lord in the bush speaking to Moses, that it took me decades to understand. And I was like, well, thanks, Gary. I don't know if that's entirely true, but I really appreciate your kindness there. And so, so it's an interesting context, though, because in our church, we have some people that are quite mature as Christians and have been maybe a professor at a seminary or even a professor at Gordon. And then we have people that are just absolutely just getting started. For example, several months ago, there was a woman that at the church, we invite people to come forward for communion. And so we give a little explanation, take the bread, place it in the cup, and, how to take communion. And so she just kind of heard the basic instruction, but she'd never really been to church before. So she's coming forward to receive communion. And I'd explained what communion is for and what it means to be a disciple of Jesus. And I suppose that she was maybe responding to Christ and wanting to unite her life to Christ, So she's coming forward, but she's never done this before. And she's looking at me, I can tell, like a little bit of a deer in the headlights of, what do I do? And so we make eye contact, and it's a little bit, this kind of startled look. She takes the bread and she shoots it like a basketball. It goes up in the air, lands in the cup, and then just walks off. And I thought, oh my gosh. Because, she took the bread, she placed it in the cup. And I was just like, this is amazing. What an example of the diversity of people that we are inviting into the good news of Jesus. And so everything from this young lady to, the theology professor from Gordon, this type of thing is really encouraging. Yeah.
So now you come back from the UK, you start at North Shore. I can't believe it's been 11 years already, but you started North Shore, and one day you have an idea that leads to a really robust pastors network. Tell us a little bit about that, please.
Yeah. So, really that vision really was birthed from my experience of living in Southwest London. And I think what happens is if you're living in a context that's a very missional context, and if that's just obvious to everyone that, as a church, we're way, way, way in the minority. For example, in the U.S., if you're going to have a big discussion on some topic in a public venue, some people might feel, especially places outside of New England, oh, we should have a Christian voice because, the Christian voice needs to be represented. But like in the UK, no one needs to hear the Christian voice. It's such a minority that it's not even on people's radar. And when you understand that you're in that type of context, then collaboration and partnership is just obvious. Like, why in the world would you compete when there's only like 2% of you? Like, we can either fiercely compete. So for example, in Essex County, it's 700 and let's say 80,000 people. We could fiercely compete for the 25,000 Christians, or we could think about, the 725 or 750,000 that don't really have access to Jesus much at all, or a community that's being changed by him. We could partner for those that need Christ. And the more missional you realize your context you're in, the more obvious partnership becomes. You stop defining yourself by way of how are we different from that other church down the road, and well, they do worship this way and we do it. And you start seeing yourself as we are the body of Christ, who is a counterculture for the common good of our community. And so we are a counterculture. We're different from the world. We're not thinking about how we're different from one another as much. And obviously we should just be partnering together for all these people that need Christ. And so I was sensing that. And then I looked on here on the North Shore, and why aren't churches partnering? And especially with Gordon Conwell and Gordon College, there was already some affinity and being trained in similar, contexts, and there's already some relationship possibility. And so I have to say that it was the easiest thing. I mean, I knew some of the pastors of other churches, and I had lunch with some of these pastors. I just sent out an email and I said, hey, what do you guys think about gathering together? We could call it the North Shore Gospel Partnership. Gospel Partnerships, we're over there in the UK. And basically, we'll figure out what can we do better together than separately. And how do we partner to mobilize prayer, to think about church planting and revitalization, how to develop leaders together, maybe partner in terms of just evangelism at times, if that makes sense, mercy and justice together. And just everybody immediately just said, yes, this sounds like exactly what we should do. And so then all of a sudden, there was this little network of 7 churches that said yes. And I thinking to myself, well, now what do I do? I've never led any kind of network before. I have no training in this, really. Yeah, a bit of an oops in a way. And so thankfully there's been some organizations that have come along after that to really help me know what that looks like. But I would say that the need was there. That it feels like the Spirit was already producing a bit of that longing, or at least giving that intuition to some of these church leaders that this would really be good to do. And so that was about 7-8 years ago.
Our mutual friend, Clive Calver, would say in New England, we're desperate enough to try doing what Jesus said. Yeah.
But no, again, I just think that, that when you begin to realize that most people in our community, it's not that they've just kind of outright rejected Jesus or Christianity. A lot of people have just never really had all that meaningful of a relationship with another Christian, or let alone a Christian in a community of other Christians. And the more that just becomes obvious, the more just kind of ridiculous it seems to be sort of competitive or something like that, or not wanting to work together. So,
well, Doug Scalisi, a pastor down on the Cape, you may know, I remember him saying early on, we're doing something similar there in terms of what's developed into a network of pastors. He was saying, you guys aren't my competitors. He said, 98% of people aren't in church on the Cape. And so my competitors are Sunday morning sports, late night Saturday, apathy, kids sports, right? It's not each other.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I really do agree with that. So, yeah. And I think one of the things that happened early on with this partnership was that we really started with developing friendships with each other. Now, not just simply friendship, it was friendship with with some purpose. Like we do want to collaborate and partner for the gospel, and what can we do better together than separately. So it wasn't just a fraternal, let's say, but it was quite relational. And so as those relationships grew, the trust grew, and then more opportunities to partner and collaborate just kind of manifested themselves through those friendships that we're building.
And you've heard me say so many times, a lot of the way you could categorize what Vision New England does is just create space for relationships to form. And then suddenly things are happening in those that we certainly didn't plan. And not anybody else, because Jesus was clear. When they're one like you and I are, when the people know God sent his son, there's a power in that unity that suddenly God uses it, and the impact on the kingdom is magnified. And so you started out, so 7 or 8 pastors start getting together, and it's grown to what now over time?
Yeah, so there's about 18 churches that are meaningfully connected to the partnership.
And I want to talk about some of the stuff you guys do together, but one thing I know you do, if I assume you still do it, is you guys pray for each other every week in church. Do you guys still do that?
Yeah. I mean, there's weeks, that we'll miss. And, you kind of go through ups, and sometimes part of the thing of this is sometimes you become more aware of it. And then sometimes you kind of forget, oh gosh, it's been a while since we prayed. But, let me give you an example of that. There was a Sunday, one of the churches, which is actually Center Grace. This is a while ago, but this is before they had a permanent location. And it just happened to be a Sunday when we were just really praying for them to find a location. They were kind of forced.
And I just want to be clear. You're praying in the worship service for this other church.
At North Shore Community Baptist Church in the Sunday service for this other church as they were trying to find a location because they had to leave the one they were in. And the service leader, who's not on our staff, was just a lay leader, was doing the prayers for that morning. And she was praying with such kind of fervency and, I guess, desire and passion that someone after the service said, "Oh, I didn't know you guys had planted a church." And I was like, What do you mean planted a church? He said, "Well, you're praying about your church plant." And I was like, no, that's this other church that's planted a church. And, because Ipswich Pres had planted that. And so I guess to me, that's an indication of the meaningfulness of the kind of partnership that it really did feel like one of us. And again, Charles, it is one of us.
Yeah,
it is one of us. Like, this is the thing, at the end of the day, I really believe there is only one church on the North Shore after all.
Yeah. Kevin, I know you'd say this too. I was just talking to Kevin McBride about this. So he's pastor up in Raymond, New Hampshire. And he was saying, if you look at the letters, any of Paul's letters, you don't see to the churches in Ephesus or the churches in Corinth. It's to the church.
Yeah. So I think that, and this is a really important thing about these partnerships, is that we don't have to manufacture our unity or the ground of our collaboration. I was actually just before this meeting, I was with some church pastor leaders in Beverly, and we're going to be doing a pulpit swap coming up. And we're going to be all teaching in different, not in our own church, going to different churches, teaching from Philippians chapter 1. And one of the things that Paul does is he says, "I thank you for our partnership in the gospel." So what Paul is saying is we don't have to come up with this ground of unity. We don't have to find what is the way we're all going to be held together. How are we ever going to find a resource strong enough to make us one? He's saying we have already been given this in Jesus already. We are partners because we're united to Christ, and therefore we're united and belong to each other. So it's up to us to then express that. But I just think about, the way I think our world is so desperate to find ways that we hold together, bind our polarized seasons that we're in, right? Of what's going to be strong enough. Do we need to come up with a war? Do we need to, come up with a common enemy? Do we need to, is there an economic vision, a national vision? What vision is enough? And you're trying to kind of frantically create something to hold together the diversity. Yeah. Whereas the church is this diverse group that is held together by Christ, and we didn't come up with Christ at all. Christ came up with the church, so to speak. And so I think this is one of the things, in fact, in that very first partnership meeting that we ever did, when I called these churches to come together, that was the passage that we looked at. And so realizing the unity that has been given to us by Jesus already as a given. And then, okay, well, how do we sort of reflect that in the way we're going to choose to relate to one another? So,
but there is a cost to it.
Sure.
Isn't there? So talk about
Sure.
that a little bit, because some may cost and some of the challenges in doing it.
Yeah. Cost, you know? I mean, well, one way you could say is, the reason I struggle with that is like, well, is it a cost? So for example, well, it's going to cost you a little bit of your independence, let's say. Okay. Instead of independence, you're going to be more interdependent. But then you ask yourself, is that a cost to be interdependent? Does it really cost you your freedom? What is our freedom for? So I would say that seeing as we are interdependent, then we're going to experience the most freedom when we are acting in that interdependency. And maybe seeing as we're actually not meant to be disconnected and independent, then when we are acting in a disconnected and independent way, we're actually not going to feel fully free. So in a way, you know, I guess the cost, in a sense, I guess it's having to let go of those things that are really, you know, it's going to cost you your competitiveness. It's going to cost you your, well, for example, if your goal as a church is just to become bigger and bigger and bigger and to consume more of those 25,000 Christians in your region to come to your church instead of other churches, I guess it'll cost you that vision. Like we say that there's basically 4 shifts that we make when we become a church that's part of this North Shore Gospel Partnership. We shift from competition to collaboration. Yep. We shift from thinking about numbers on a Sunday or numbers in our, you know, programs to thinking about actual formation, transformation, discipleship of Christians. That becomes more the metric. We think less about growing by getting bigger and bigger and adding to growing by disciples multiplying in terms of passing on their faith to others, or churches multiplying, so planting or participating in some other revitalization. And then lastly, we talk about the shift of instead of just thinking about collecting Christians, which is obviously okay to do, we gather on a Sunday, but thinking about envisioning them, discipling them, equipping them, mobilizing them for the places that they live, learn, work, and play is one of the little phrases we use. So I guess it costs you some of those other ways of thinking, but I don't really know that that's actually a cost because it more fits truly our identity as a church.
Well, it almost sounds like if I see it as a cost, it's at least part of that is I am thinking about it wrong. Mm-hmm. The way I think about it being a cost is, well, I've got to get my church's stuff done. And now I've got this other thing I have to go to. And they want to switch pulpits, and that's work in for me. But it's because I've misdefined my mission field.
That's a good way to think of it, Charles. I'd say that rather than thinking about those things I was just saying, discipleship, multiplication, mobilization, collaboration, rather than thinking about those as, oh, those are 4 more things that I have to do, instead, think of those as priorities. A lot of pastors kind of struggle to realize, like, what is the priority here that I'm trying to lead? Like, how do I decide between the million of things I could do? Well, these 4 things are not 4 more things to do along the million. They are the lens that you look through in order to decide about the various things you could do. So it's really not one more thing you can do. It's the thing that helps you decide what are the things that you are actually going to do as a church. They're going to be shaped by these values and priorities. Yeah. And I think in a way, it's a great relief to know what that is.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, again, we can think about it wrong is, going back to my corporate world experience, right? There was no notion of, I don't want to talk to the people in finance because, they're a distraction from me getting the work done, and salespeople are a distraction from me getting the world done. Now, there are times where they would frustrate the tar out of you. No two ways about that. But I needed them, or we didn't have a business.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't an add-in. It was the way we worked.
Yeah. So I guess what I would say here is back to this language of what does this cost? I think, again, if you're trying to do these partnerships with an old lens in which you look at the mission of your church along the lines of, again, trying to be as big as possible or trying to be better than the other churches. Well, if you use that lens, it's definitely going to feel super costly.
Yeah.
So actually, what we're calling people is not to a particular way of doing church necessarily. We're calling people to wear a different lens. Yeah. And then each of these churches in this partnership, they all look totally different. I mean, you wouldn't walk into one of the churches and say, oh, they've got the quote brand or something. There's no brand. It's where we're driven by a shared language around shared commitments, shared priorities, a shared vision. So the vision is not so much to become a larger church per se. And I keep using that as an example because I think that so often is the scorecard. But the vision is more about how do we give every man, woman, and child in Essex County greater access to the gospel of Jesus that's transforming a community of people. It's about more people having that access. It's about a gospel movement on the North Shore. And one church could do really well, but if we're not, like, one church doubling in size is not going to help reach the 750,000 people out there. So it's going to have to be a team effort when looked through that lens.
Join us next week as we continue our discussion with Pastor Bobby Warrenburg on the North Shore Gospel Partnership. This program is created by Vision New England, which accelerates evangelism by helping the church work in unity to make disciples, do justice, and share Jesus, so New England will be transformed by the love of Jesus. You can find additional resources and support our mission at visionNewEngland.org. We want to thank our friends at World Vision who are celebrating 75 years of God's faithfulness and trusting Him with a worldwide vision to end extreme poverty for children everywhere. Join us next Sunday at 2 p.m. on Life Changing Radio. Thank you and God bless you.
At Leadership Transformations, we believe that when you have the right resources to help you slow down and experience a deep and refreshing connection to God, you can become the discerning leader you know you are created to be. Friends, Steve Macchia here, and I have a free gift for your soul. It's called Pathways. Pathways is our weekly email aimed at offering you soul-nourishing content for the journey. It contains readings, prayers, spiritual practices, a link to the Discerning Leader podcast, as well as information about all of our upcoming soul care retreats, workshops, and online offerings. So head on over to leadershiptransformations.org today and sign up for this free resource. It will help you slow down and be more. God bless you, friends.